All right, everybody, welcome to the show. We got a juicy one for you today. So we got Cornel West versus RFK Jr. The gloves are coming off. We have a bombshell development in the student debt relief case, which is going to the Supreme Court. And we also have Jordan Chariton goes to a pro-Trump rally. And man, oh man, do they say some wild, wild things. So buckle up for that. We'll get to all that and much, much more. Let's go ahead and jump into it here. And you guys know the shameless plugs. Everybody click like, click subscribe, support the show on Patreon or tip on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. You know the deal. And by the way, I massively appreciate everybody who does support this show. You guys make it work. So Cornel West went on Brianna Joy Gray's Bad Faith podcast. And she, of course, interviewed him about his new presidential run. He's running with the Green Party. They got into, a whole bunch of different issues. It was about an hour-long interview. She also asked him about RFK Jr. Now, RFK Jr. made some news in a negative way recently when he spoke to Glenn Greenwald, and RFK Jr.'s commentary on the issue of Israel and Palestine sounds like any standard Democrat. It sounds like any corporate establishment Democrat, very, very pro-Israel, very disrespectful and dismissive to the Palestinian cause, and that caused a bit of an outcry. Now, RFK Jr. Has now made a habit of saying things which would put him in the category of standard Democrat. But for whatever reason, there's a large contingent online that likes to ignore that very basic reality about him and pretend like he's super based and he's actually the most left candidate. That's nonsense. Well, Cornel West is not here to play games on this question. So Brianna Joy Gray is going to ask him about RFK Jr.'s comments on Israel and Palestine. And he does not disappoint. Cornel West doesn't, to say the least.
Just alluded to some remarks by RFK Jr. He, very famously now at this point, tweeted and then retracted his support for Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, who has been a guest on this podcast, saying that it was because he found his advocacy for Palestinians to be holding Arab nations to a different standard as Israel in a way that he felt was anti-Semitic. He elaborated on those remarks in an interview with Glenn Greenwald from Monday of this week, in which he, and we'll insert a clip of it here, but he went on to say that basically our support of Israel is justified because it is unique in the Middle East in terms of its treatment of LGBTQIA people. He said that Palestinians kill Israeli children purposefully in a way that Israelis do not kill Palestinian children purposefully. And although Glenn Greenwald tried to tease out how the same justifications that RFK Jr. was using to defend Israel are used to justify American spending in Ukraine, it was clear from the conversation that RFK Jr. had never made those connections before.
Groups that have, in many ways, been dictating policy in Israel over the last few years. I think part of the responsibility of the United States is to try to find a path to justice for the Palestinians. But on all these issues, if you live in any of these other countries and you're gay, for example, you can be killed for that. Israel is the only place where you have freedom. If you're a transvestite, if you have other kind of dissident views, you'd much rather be in Israel than any other place.
I get that argument, but go ahead. You can finish. All right, well, I just wanted to ask you quickly.
Israel, and we need to have the same standard for judging Israel as we judge other Arab countries.
Israel is one of our top allies, if not our top ally. We give them billions of dollars a year every single year. So if they're held to a slightly higher standard than some non-ally countries, that's because we are at least partly responsible for what they do because we pay them. Now, beyond that, you can say, certainly there's an equivalence to some extent between Israel and other countries in the region, but in other ways, they actually go above and beyond with how barbaric they are. They are effectively a theocracy pretending to be a democracy, and they're doing apartheid, and they're doing a slow-motion ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So in some ways, they actually are uniquely bad. Now, the point about, well, you'd rather be LGBTQ in Israel than in other Arab countries around it, there's definitely an argument there, but make no mistake about it. This is a point made by neocons and far-right Republicans to try to justify and rationalize Israel being able to bulldoze over the Palestinians and steal their land and violate international law.
And Israel is going into the West Bank and killing children. It's never doing that deliberately. Never.
If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you, man. I have a bridge to sell you if you believe that. You think Israel cares deeply about civilian casualties? But it gets worse. Wait for it.
Ever said it is.
Well, a lot of people have said it. A lot of people have said it is. But let me just ask you, because I just want to focus the.
In all of those other countries, it is the deliberate policy of those countries to attack and target civilians.
So the frothing at the mouth Arabs, they're killing children on purpose, whereas heavenly Israel is only targeting the bad guys and maybe accidentally sometimes ends up killing children. Remember Operation Protective Edge in 2014? Israel-Gaza conflict, 80% of Palestinians killed by Israeli strikes are civilians, UN report says. Many of the fatalities have been children, and 1,360 more have been wounded. In fact, there are other numbers which say about 500 children were massacred. But it's okay, don't worry. Getting the proper target 20% of the time, that's really what they were going for. The 80% civilian death, that's just collateral damage. They meant well, but what are you going to do? Sometimes accidents happen. This is the same kind of garbage that people spew to defend U.S. foreign policy. When we invade Iraq or we invade Afghanistan or we do the illegal drone war where 90% of the time, by the way, we get the wrong people. So very bizarre that on this one issue, all of a sudden, RFK, when it comes to foreign policy, becomes the most standard Democrat on the planet. What happened? I thought he was an outsider. What happened? I thought he was anti-establishment. I've never heard a more deeply pro-establishment take than this.
Objections to U.S. involvement in Ukraine were narrow and weren't backed up by a broader understanding of U.S. imperialism and the problems there. So I wondered if you could weigh in more specifically on what you think RFK Jr. is getting wrong and what people should be looking for in a presidential candidate.
Well, one, you want a presidential candidate, and I think you just want this in any human being, that have backbone, that have integrity, that have consistency, not to check what you deeply believe after you've had some dialogue or discourse with a group of people or a community that's going to be shaping and molding how you perceive the world. Think for yourself.
Are we referring to the tweet he put up with Rabbi Shmuley, I believe his name was?
Well, I think it's probably a whole network that he has. And it may not only be exclusively Jewish brothers and sisters. I mean, there's a lot of non-Jewish brothers and sisters who are still very much tied to a discourse that renders the suffering of Palestinians invisible. So it's not just a tribal thing. You see, people are generally convinced that Israel has a right to exist, and therefore it has a right to do whatever it wants to do, and that includes killing innocent people. And I asked my dear brother RFK Jr., do you know what happened between July 8th and August 26th of 2014? 50 days, 551 precious Palestinian babies killed in 50 days. How many babies have been killed in the vicious criminal invasion and occupation of Ukraine? After a whole year. Who spoke out for those precious Palestinian babies? Were they somehow tied to Hamas? Were they somehow a threat to Israel? No, they're human beings. Their babies are just as precious as black babies, white babies, brown babies, indigenous babies in the American empire, or any other babies. And if he thinks somehow that each baby who was killed somehow was never in any way intentional, deliberate, they didn't know what they were doing, he needs to really get off the crack pipe. He must think that we have absolutely no sense of what's going on in the world.
He needs to really get off the crack pipe. If he thinks Israel is just trying to do its best, they mean well, they're not purposely going after civilians. Damn. Now, some people have gone after Marianne Williamson for her comments on Israel-Palestine. Let me tell you something. Her comments are nowhere near as egregious as this. Why did they go after her? Because she said, I'm for a two-state solution. Perhaps not understanding that the two-state solution window has long closed, and now what we're really talking about is a one-state democratic solution. But she said she's for a two-state solution, and some people were like, oh, how dare you? Let me tell you something else. She also said, Marianne Williamson did, and I know, because I asked her, she said, we need to condition aid to Israel. So if they don't stop with their rampant human rights abuse and their repression of Palestinians, they shouldn't get U.S. taxpayer money. So her position on this is about 1,000 times better than his position on this. But thankfully now people are starting to wake up to the fact that there are many issues where he's standard establishment Democrat. Now, by the way, there's also many issues where he's not standard establishment, but he's contrarian to the point he has online brainworms. So we went through this, man. He already told Crystal that it's not politically realistic to get Medicare for all. He already said that. So he ain't going to fight for that. You can't say he's pro-Medicare for all. Crystal asked a great question. She said, look, you go after Big Pharma all the time, which is legitimate and fair. Talk about regulatory capture. You're 100% right about that. But if you really want to stop the problems with Big Pharma, isn't the heart of it the profit motive? Wouldn't we have to nationalize Big Pharma in order to make it so they're not price gouging and caring about the bottom line first? And his reaction was, no, I wouldn't go that far. What? So look, when you get down to the brass tacks and you get down to where he stands on the actual issues, he ain't it. He ain't it. And the numbers of him doing pretty well in the primary, I really do believe you can pawn that off to his incredibly famous last name, the political dynasty of the Kennedys. And so there's a lot of default support, one might call it, for him. But I guarantee you, as soon as certainly Democratic primary voters hear the stuff he's saying on a regular basis, they're going to roll their eyes and they're going to look elsewhere. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. And by the way, he's also out there now. He's making up numbers. He said the United States has given $8 trillion in support to Ukraine. $8 trillion. That's nowhere near the amount of money that the U.S. has given to you. Now, look, you could disagree with the amount of support the U.S. has given Ukraine. There's a fair debate and conversation on that front, but it's nowhere near $8 trillion. We're talking about, at most, it's like $200 billion. There's quite a difference between $8 trillion and $200 billion, which begs the question, where the hell did you get that number from? And did you not have any critical faculties in your mind go, I don't know, that doesn't seem right? We spent $7 trillion in our 20-year war in Iraq, when all is said and done. And by the way, that extrapolates all the way out to 2035 or something like that? No, 2053, excuse me. With interest, $7 trillion in a 20-plus year war, and you think we gave $8 trillion in 8 years? What are you talking about? That's utterly made up. So he plays loose with data, he plays loose with facts. That's super obvious, makes very, very questionable claims. But now he's getting caught speeding. Because now you have somebody who truly is sort of like the epitome of the left-wing crusader here in Cornel West, and he's not taking any nonsense. He's not taking any nonsense at all. So it's getting interesting with all these voices now in the primary. You have Biden, who barely knows where he is. You have Marianne Williamson, who I think is doing a fantastic job in highlighting all the best issues. She's literally running on an economic bill of rights, reviving FDR's idea, which was colossally popular. And now you have Cornel West and RFK. And RFK is, at this moment, by the way, making his rounds on the podcast circuit. And he's shoving his foot in his mouth quite a bit. The new thing is he's claiming chemicals in the water are making people trans. I wish I was kidding. The argument is chemicals in the water are creating gender dysphoria. Okay, dude. Good luck with your campaign. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.